nowhere in any catalog or anything else are you ever gonna hear or read, drop your Foxbody by 5 inches. What's up guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. Today we're gonna do something exciting. Well, exciting for me, hopefully it's exciting for you. I recently did the video on air ride on my 1993 silver tip ditch coupe, which is sitting right here behind me. And as a result of that, a lot of people continue on with suspension questions and, you know, how low can you go on a static drop, coilovers versus springs versus air, all of those different things. So today I want to focus on or share with you guys real time on, well, how low can you go and what can you use to get there? So stay tuned because we're going to be busting out the measuring tape and we got a whole array of different varieties of suspension setups in my shop here. So we're going to go over those, see how low we are to the ground, see what drivability is like, and then hopefully it'll help you guys make the decision on where you want your ride height to be, maybe what you want your wheel and tire size to be, most importantly, probably what you want your comfort levels to be. So stay tuned. So this literally just came to me, you know, a couple people asked questions and then I was measuring something and I walked around and I started measuring distance from the ground to the tops of wheel wells in some of my cars. So I'm like, you know what? I'd probably make a pretty good video. Now on my website, I've actually got a pretty comprehensive list that was started by somebody else and their website disappeared. Luckily, I had kept the chart that they had. And what that chart is, and I'm going to link to it down in the description, is a list of a lot of aftermarket springs and their spring rates, and then ultimately how much they lower your Fox. Now, there's variables into that, wheel sizes, tire profile sizes, all these other types of things that are going to throw things off when you're thinking about them, but it's a pretty good list. And as we talk about how low you go to the ground, those spring rates play a very important role in terms of how your car is going to ride. So let's start with the tip ditch coupe here on air. This car is completely aired out at the moment. So there's 0 PSI all the way around. And in the video, I explained to you guys that this car can still roll, okay? So even though that there's no air in these bags, it can still roll back and forth freely. Now, would I be able to do a full turn of the steering wheel on the front? No, probably not. But if something were to happen and I lost tire pressure, or not tire pressure, airbag pressure, I would still be able to pull off to the side of the road safely. The exhaust isn't scraping on the ground. None of those things. Tires aren't rubbing. Again, as long as you're kind of going straight, you're good. But this is the lowest car in the shop. And because of air ride, it is where it is. So let's measure this guy. All right, guys. So our front is 21.5 inches off the ground. And our rear, which I've explained can be very challenging, is 22.75. So you know what? Let's do the old trick where we document what's going on here. All right, guys, got my secret little notepad here. So first car is silver ditch, all right? And then we'll do front and we'll do rear. Okay, so we'll just kind of do one of these. So what did we say in the front? I think we were 21.5, and the rear, I think we were 22 0.75. All right, so now we've got the lowest car in the room measured, and that's sort of going to be our benchmark going forward. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here is imagine this car wasn't on 18-inch wheels. Imagine this car was on 16-inch wheels, and it had a small 16-inch tire size. I'm thinking like a 245/50 maybe. Trying to think of what would actually be a fairly small size that's actually attainable to get this day and age. So what would happen is if we actually had a tire that had a shorter overall diameter, it would actually lower the car down some more. And at that point, it could get dangerous because maybe the exhaust would start touching the ground, right? So this tire profile and wheel size, I know that this is probably a larger diameter over stock. So even just to throw a set of, 16-inch ponies with 225, whatever they came with, we could be in for a time where maybe the exhaust would be touching the ground. Now, we talked about that on the video with the white Dutch Coupe over there, because I was essentially using tire profiles to sort of balance out the stance and the height of the car. So if you guys are interested in knowing more about the tire profiling deal, make sure you check out that video. Maybe I'll link to it up in like one of those little bubbles up in the top corner, so you guys can kind of go over that and you can see how ultimately your wheel size and tire size is going to impact how low you are to the ground. So let's move on to the second guy in the room, second lowest guy in the room, which is the stalker vert. Now, the interesting thing about the stalker vert is that it is not on air and it's static, and I can actually drive the car around like this. I can turn this wheel fully. I don't have rubs back there unless, I'm really, going over maybe a corner and hit a big bump and, you get a little bit of movement. But this car is at a drivable ride height, and although they are coilovers in the front, it's not like I can hit a button and just raise this up. I got to jack the car up, I got to turn, use the spanner wrenches, and ultimately jack this car up if I want it to sit higher. Now, this car is sitting at 22 3/4 in the front, and we are sitting at 23.5 in the rear. Stalker vert. So we are an inch higher, 1.25 inches higher in the front, and in the rear, we're actually only 0.75 inches higher. So it's actually pretty impressive when you think about it, right? We're talking about a full-blown airbag, air suspension setup, which has been modified to get the rear down a little bit versus a static drop here. So it's kind of an interesting fact, right? Like this guy, I literally drive it around the way that it is. This guy, I can go forwards and backwards, but again, I'm not going to drive on 0 PSI of air. That's just, it's not going to happen. It's pretty much you're letting the shocks and the struts do whatever suspension work for you that's left. So it's interesting that this actually has drivability so close in reality to what this is without compromising the fact that there's pretty much no suspension from a spring or from an air spring for that matter. Now, before we go on to some other static drop cars, let's measure something factory. So this 86, untouched, all original, factory wheels, factory tires. So let's get a measurement on this guy. Here we are 26 3/4 in the front. And we are pretty much 27 3/4, well, maybe a little less. Call it 27.5 in the rear. So 26 3/4, 27.5, and this is the 86 GT. So when we're looking here, guys, the Stalker Vert is a 4-inch drop in the front over factory on the wheels that it's running on. Now, same thing that I mentioned before. If we had a small 16-inch pony, or I don't know, even a 16-inch Simmons wheel that had a pretty short tire profile. So there are some 16-inch tires that are actually a shorter profile than that one. This car would be undrivable because the exhaust right now is literally maybe 3/4 of an inch, if that, off the ground. So 4-inch drop in the front, and we're a solid 4-inch drop in the rear. So that's an interesting thing to talk about, right? Normal lowering springs for your Fox. So typically speaking, and here's an exercise for you guys right now. You can go to your garage, go to your driveway, go measure your front versus rear and tell me what spring you're running with your car. More importantly, tell me the spring and the wheel and tire size. So that way we can get an idea of the variance depending on the wheel and tire combo, because maybe you're on a drag radial, maybe you're on something ultra low profile, maybe you're on 20-inch wheels, God knows what, right? So 18-inch wheel with a 4-inch drop over factory, honestly, is truly, truly impressive. So now let's take a measurement of a car that has what would be your typical lowering spring. So here is Detch number 9. That would be equipped with Detch springs, no coils cut, none of that stuff. And let's see where it sits in comparison to a stock car. So we are 25.25. And 25.5, pretty much. So 25.25, 25.5. Look at this, a Detch spring, we're lowering about 1.5 inches here. And in the rear, we're about a solid 2 inches. So 1.5 to 2 inches is like the norm. It's your typical drop on an aftermarket lowering spring, kind of despite what the brand is. Might go up to 1.75 inches, maybe hit 2 inches. You know, if you're on an Eibach, their street spring, I think, is the one that is quite a bit lower. But the spring rates are what is important, guys, because the spring rates are going to dictate on how bouncy or how comfy that ride is going to be, how stiff. And that is your average drop. Now, let's take the Wild Strawberry car here, because I can't remember if I removed the isolators, but there's definitely a coil cut out of these Detch springs. So let's measure these guys up. All right, we're right at 24. And in the back, we're right at 24. What an even stance that is. In fact, I'm surprised it's sitting at 24, to be honest. So, Strawberry. Isn't my handwriting just horrible? 24 and 24. So, this is crazy, right? The Strawberry car is actually only 1/2 inch higher in the rear than the Stalker Vert. That's, I'm actually kind of surprised by that. And we're 1.25 inches higher in the front compared to the Stalker Vert. Now, like this car, it doesn't seem as low to me. It never really has. And I think because the larger profile of tire, now it's not that large, it's actually a 245/40 front and rear, which typically people will run a 245/45 and get a little bit more sidewall. I wanted to use the sidewall to my advantage to be able to just get the car down a hair more. And I think in this case, that's exactly what's happening, because what we've done is we've removed a little bit of diameter from the top and a little bit of diameter from the bottom. And what it's done is the illusion is that the car isn't necessarily looking like it's sitting down as low, because if there was a 45 series tire in there, it would look like that fender was over more tire, but it's not because of the shorter profile. And ultimately, I think that that's what's kind of fooling the eye. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at this, like, you know, pretty much we're half an inch different in the rear. Doesn't really look like it, does it? Now again, some of that is stance, some of that is fitment. Let me get a little bit closer and I will reiterate. This car is 24. This car is 23.5 inches off the ground. So this is only half an inch difference in the rear. So it's amazing what an 18-inch wheel with its tire profile and setup is compared to the 17-inch wheel with its tire profile and setup. Hard to believe that that's only half an inch, but you guys saw it with the measuring tape. Same thing in the front. This is 1.25 inches higher than this. You guys are probably like, no, it's not possible. It's not that. I'll get the measuring tape again. Measuring tape is on the ground. 24. In fact, it's a 1/16 under 24, okay? $22.5. Okay, I gotta make an edit here. It's actually 22.5 is the stock revert in the front, 23.5 in the rear. So 1.5 inches difference between the front of this car and the front of this car. Like, I've never seen 1.5 inches look so much different, other than maybe your girlfriend's opinion. I'm gonna leave that one there. All right, so the strawberry car actually surprised me, to be honest with you. The tire profile, those 245/40s are definitely making a difference in the 17-inch form, 100%. It's unreal, and I see this car every single day. Everyone always tells me, oh, it's so low, and I never really think of it as being that low, but it actually is pretty low when you factor in stock versus a normal lowering spring, so we'll call it, versus what that is. So let's get into the two other static drop cars. The two white notches in the room here, both on 17-inch wheels, both static dropped, and well, let's just get into it and measure it. We'll start with this guy in the front, which if you remember, I stepped the rear up to a 245/45. 17 in the rear to get the rear up a little bit with that tire profile, because the rear was sitting a little bit lower than the front. By the way, if you guys have never seen this imperfection on this car, when you drop your car, guys, this was a mistake I made when I was in my early 20s. The inner fender has a screw right on the bottom side here. If you have a big tire and you're low to the ground, your tire can either hit that screw and create this Audi dent, or if you forget about it and you're trying to roll your fenders, you are going to hit the backside of that screw and you are going to create an Audi dent just like this. So be extremely careful. It sucks. It's been like this. I did this literally the day after the car was painted, and lesson learned the hard way. Okay, we are 23.25, and we are 23.75. White Dutch, and then let's do the Cali Coupe. All right, we are 23 and 23 3/4. All right, so the results are in. The Cali Coupe is a little bit lower in the front than the white Dutch Coupe. Same rear height, okay? And funny enough, these guys are only 1/4 of an inch higher in the rear than the stock Vert. And they are 1 inch taller than the silver tip Dutch Coupe is on air. All right, so let's look at our findings for a second here. This guy here and this guy there. So the rears are 100%, they're the same height off the ground, okay? 17 by 9 on a 255 40/17. 17 by 9.5 on a 245 45/17. So we've probably got a little bit 255 40. That's going to be a little bit less sidewall than this one is here. So because this car has less sidewall in the rear, that means that it's naturally going to sit a little bit lower versus this guy that has more sidewall and is sitting just as low. So which car requires more effort to get it lower to the ground? The answer is this one, because you ultimately need the suspension to be sitting down lower to compensate for the extra diameter of the tire. So what's the suspension setup? Well, funny enough, this guy is static. This guy is on springs that are cut and modified, however you want to call it, and bump stops, all that other stuff that I sort of alluded to in my air ride video. Those have all been done in place so that I can get the car as low as it is in the rear. This car is riding on conies, all right, and rides amazing. So I have a really high spring rate spring in here on Coney struts and shocks, rides phenomenal. This guy, SVE coilovers. That's right, your entry-level SVE coilover kit, as low as everything can go. All right, so it cannot go any lower on that coilover kit unless you start removing coils from the coilovers. And, well, they are the SVE struts and shocks because that comes with the kit, ultimately being a coilover kit. That is as low as it'll go. This car, considering what it is for the cost of the SVE coilovers and how low it is to the ground, rides okay. But I'll tell you right now, your kidneys might not like you after a long road trip. It's a fun cruiser to get to a local car show or whatever else. I would not road trip this car. This car, I'd road trip it. Notorious has road tripped it. This car, actually Tom War Admiral has even driven this car and loves this car. So the spring rate, struts and shocks, everything else working together, a little bit taller tire profile is going to help the situation as well. All right, so always make sure to take that into account. The more profile you have on your sidewall, generally, the more comfortable the ride is going to be. So there's that to keep in mind as well. A strawberry car, aftermarket springs, cut down a little bit. This is running on conies as well. This car, surprisingly, does not ride that well. And I feel like by taking material out of Dutch springs, which are one of the highest spring rated springs that are out there, they get up to about 1,000 pounds per inch with their spring rates. Removing some of the coils out of that probably has these spring rates, well, in the front, somewhere up maybe around the 1,100-1,200 mark. And on Coney Reds, I think it's just too much. Don't get me wrong, it rides okay, but to be honest, the white coupe over there, rides better than this car. And we're talking both cut springs, we're talking both conies. So what's the difference between the two? It's the spring rates. Spring rates, ultimately make the comfort of the car. So again, if you guys are interested in spring rates, check out the chart. I'll post it up. You can check out the link on my website. You can go from there. Now, Stalker Vert, we are coilovers in the front, Racelands actually, the entry-level Racelands, cranked all the way down as low as they can go. And the rear is my own custom setup. If you guys are interested in the custom setup on this car, there is a video on it. And this is truly impressive on how the rear, well, how this car is as low it is to the ground in general. Now, this car was actually this low before on a coil spring in the front, not a coilover, but I cheated by using a 2-inch drop spindle from Racecraft way back in the day. And ultimately, a 2-inch drop spindle just pretty much moves where your spindle or where your rotor goes on, ultimately keeping your suspension geometry, just dropping everything down 2 inches, which, what more could you ask for? There would be no change in your ride quality, and you've just lowered your car by 2 inches. So long story on how those got removed from the car and sold off and bought the car back, but we won't get into that. But you could achieve that with a drop spindle as well. We have ditch number 9 in the back. This is the definition of an aftermarket lowering spring with good suspension and everything else, right? This car is running on conies as well, yellow conies, so adjustable. And it's on the Dutch springs, so we've got the heavy duty 1,000 pounds per inch in the front, but they're not cut, they're not compromised, right? So if we compare this guy, 22 1/4, 25 1/2 versus Strawberry, which is 24 and 24, Strawberry car is 1.5 inches lower in the rear and is 1.25 inches lower in the front. So that inch makes a difference. Talked about that earlier. The tip ditch coupe, there's really not much to say about this car because it's air ride. We know we can roll like this if we bump it up 1 inch, because it is the lowest car in here. That is, with no air in the airbags, it is the lowest car. So we need to assume that we're putting something in the bags. There needs to be a spring rate of some sort, right? So even if we're putting 50, 60 pounds in the front and maybe 10 pounds of pressure in the rear, let's say it raises the car up even 1 inch. If we go up 1 inch in the front, we'd be at the same ride height as the Stalker Vert. We'd actually be higher in the rear because the rear of this car is actually only 3/4 of an inch, but you guys get the idea. Right? So we could air this up to the ride height of the Stalker Vert and we'd be cruising. Finally, last but not least, stock. Stock. So here it is. Rides probably like your grandmother's sofa. From the factory it did. Once your struts and your shocks and bushings and everything else start to get clapped out, well, this car isn't going to ride so nice. It'll probably be all wobbly and bouncy and everything else, but we know what ultimately the ride height looks like. So our final conclusion, which I think we've mentioned it before, is that over stock, which is 26.75 in the front and 27.5 in the rear, we've gone down almost 5 inches on the tip ditch coupe in the front and a little more than 5 inches in the rear. So nowhere in any catalog or anything else are you ever gonna hear or read, drop your Foxbody by 5 inches. Like 5 inches is truck stuff. Like you hear that when you get into C-notches, lowering control arms, drop spindles, everything else, like on my Silver Lightning. Like a 5-inch drop is serious, let alone a full solid 4-inch drop front and rear like the Stalker Vert is. So pretty interesting stuff when you think about it. I was going to say amazing. To me, it's amazing. It's super interesting because you just don't hear about that much drop in the aftermarket world. Traditionally, maximum that you hear is a 3-inch drop. So the fact that we're talking 4 inches of drop is something substantial and quite a bit different. So again, I'm curious to hear from you guys. I know this video has dragged on, but I hope that you've truly found it informative and interesting, because I even surprised myself with the strawberry car, right? So get out your measuring tapes, get out to your garage, measure your front and rear distances from the ground. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say and to see what wheel and tire setups that you guys have. And I'm sure I'll probably end up with a lot more lowering questions, which is fine because I love that stuff. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the channel. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, do all those things. And we'll see you here next time on the Infamous Project.